The air was a suffocating shroud that August night, heavy with damp heat and the bitter tang of betrayal, when my mom and her new crew decided I was trash to toss out. I just stepped into the kitchen, boots still gritty from a brutal day, craving the familiar groan of the house Dad left me, a sanctuary I thought was untouchable. Instead, I walked into a trap. Mom sat rigid at the table, her fingers twisting like she was strangling her own guilt, while Frank, my stepdad, loomed in the shadows, arms crossed, his smug grin a knife waiting to cut. "Sit," she barked, her voice a brittle thread, and my stomach knotted before she even opened her mouth again. The room stank of her cooking, a thick stew bubbling on the stove, made for them, not me, a gut punch reminder I was already erased. "Frank and the kids need space," she said, her eyes flicking to him like a dog begging for scraps. "You're grown. You don't fit here anymore. Pack your stuff and go." My heart slammed into my ribs, a wild, raging beat of disbelief. Go? This wasn't some flop house they could squat in. This was my house, willed to me by Dad, his last stand to keep me safe after he was gone. I'd let them crash here, swallowing my pride, thinking we could stitch some kind of family out of the wreckage, but now they were kicking me to the curb like a stray? I exploded, my voice a raw, jagged roar. "This is my house, Mom. Dad gave it to me. Not you, not Frank, not his spoiled little leeches." Frank lumbered forward, his bulk swallowing the light, his tone dripping with venom. "You're selfish," he sneered, like I was the one trespassing. "We're a family now, and you're in the way." Family? I'd choked down their chaos for months, his kids' smirks, their messes smeared across my floors, all while I clung to the ghost of Dad's memory. Mom just stared, her silence a coward's blade sinking deep. I stormed to my room, fury shaking my hands as I yanked clothes into a bag, the deed to the house glaring from my desk, a truth they dared to ignore. They thought they could rewrite me out of my own life, strut around like they owned the place, but they'd missed the one thing that mattered. My name was etched on that paper, not theirs. I tore out that night, the door crashing shut behind me, their voices swallowed by the dark as I swore I'd come back swinging. I landed on a friend's couch, the sting of their betrayal a live wire in my chest, sparking a vow. They'd stolen my home, but they wouldn't keep it. I'd wait, sharpen my claws, and when they least expected it, I'd rip it all back, every last splinter they thought they'd claimed. The days after they threw me out bled into a restless fog, every hour stoking the inferno roaring inside me. I crashed on my buddy Jace's couch, the springs jabbing my spine like a cruel joke, a constant prod to the wound they'd ripped open. My house, the one Dad fought to leave me, was now their playground. Frank's loudmouth kids probably sprawled across my bed, Mom fussing over them like I'd never existed. I'd creep by at night, tires whispering on the asphalt, just to catch the glow of lights through the curtains. Frank's rusted truck squatting in the driveway like a conqueror's flag. It wasn't longing dragging me there. It was rage, a molten core that kept me sleepless, plotting their downfall. They thought I'd crawl away, lick my wounds, and let them dance on my grave, but they didn't know the beast they'd woken. That deed, my ace, sat tucked in a lockbox at Jace's, a ticking bomb they'd forgotten in their smug victory lap. I didn't charge back in, though. Rage alone wouldn't win this. I needed steel, a plan forged in quiet fury. I took a job at a lumberyard, hauling planks until my hands bled, the ache of fuel I turned into focus. Every sweaty dollar got stashed, a growing arsenal for the fight ahead. Nights I'd hunch over that deed at Jace's rickety table, tracing Dad's signature, his careful script, a promise I'd damn well keep. He'd built that house into a fortress for me, and they'd turned it into their pigsty. I tracked down a lawyer, a shark named Lena, all sharp edges and zero patience for sob stories. She smirked when I spilled it all, her fingers tapping the deed. "They're parasites," she said, voice crisp. "You own it, they don't. We can bury them whenever you're ready." I nodded, teeth gritted, but I held the leash on that trigger. I wanted them fat and lazy, thinking they'd won, before I yanked it all away. Months crawled by, and I watched them sink deeper into my stolen life. Jace fed me scraps of their arrogance, how Frank crowed at the bar about his place, how Mom preened to neighbors about her perfect little clan. It churned my guts, but it sharpened my edge. I moved into a shoebox apartment, bare walls and a single bulb, a base to sharpen my claws while I waited. I'd pace its cracked floors, picturing the day I'd storm back, key in hand, their jaws dropping as the ground caved beneath them. Lena kept the legal gears oiled, eviction papers drafted, just awaiting my word. I even roped in the old neighbors, the ones who'd watched Dad pour his soul into that house, their nods and quiet promises a shield for when the war broke out. I stayed low, a ghost they thought they'd banished, letting them wallow in their delusion. Then, one rainy dusk, I rolled by and saw it. Frank had slapped a cheap awning over the porch, a tacky scar on Dad's clean lines, like he could piss on every trace of us. That lit the match. I called Lena that night, voice a low growl through the storm. "Do it," I said. "I want them gone." She didn't blink, and by morning the wheels spun, a legal avalanche they'd never outrun. I could taste it, the sweet, sharp edge of their shock when they realized their castle was built on sand, that the kid they'd kicked out held the deed to their kingdom. I'd been silent, patient, a predator in the dark. But now the hunt was on. They'd forgotten who owned that house, and I'd make them choke on that mistake, step by brutal step. The morning the eviction notice landed was a jagged dawn, sky bruised with clouds, a perfect mirror to the storm I'd unleashed. Lena had moved like a blade through silk, cutting through red tape with a predator's grace, and she texted me late the night before, voice crackling through the line. "It's done," she said, "all business. Notice hits tomorrow. 30 days, then they're dust." I barely slept, my cramped apartment alive with the hum of vengeance, the deed glowing in my mind like a war banner. I could see it, that crisp envelope smacking against the front door, Frank's thick fingers ripping it open, Mom's gasp as the walls they'd claimed started crumbling. They'd strutted around my house, blind to the noose tightening, thinking I'd faded into nothing. This wasn't just paperwork, it was a guillotine, and I'd swung it with every ounce of the fury they'd sown. I stayed away, didn't need to see it myself. Lena's guy, a lean shadow named Vic, snapped me a photo, the notice pinned to that ugly awning, timestamped just past sunrise. My phone erupted minutes later, Mom's number blazing across the screen like a distress flare. I let it buzz, each ring a sweet stab of their panic, then played her voicemail with a grin I couldn't hide. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, voice splintering. "Evicting us? This is our home. You can't." "Our home?" The lie scorched my throat, and I trashed it without a reply. Frank's call followed, a guttural snarl spitting through. "You're dead for this? You hear me? I'll drag you down." I saved that one, a gift for Lena, his threats a flimsy shield against the truth. They'd forgotten the deed, my name in black ink, and now it was biting back. Word spread fast, the neighborhood lighting up with their unraveling. Jace texted me the play-by-play, Frank bellowing in the yard, Mom clutching her chest like some tragic heroine, the kids slinking behind curtains. Old man Harris from down the street rang me, his gravelly voice thick with glee. "They're running scared," he said. "Your dad's laughing somewhere, kid." That hit deep, a flicker of pride cutting through the rage, and I thanked him, voice steady. I cruised by that night, slow and deliberate, catching Frank's glare from the porch, his fist slamming the railing. I didn't blink, just stared him down, the notice flapping in the breeze like a flag of war. For the first time, I felt the tide turn, their arrogance drowning in the flood I'd unleashed. The next days were a circus of their chaos. Mom pounded on my door, her sobs echoing through the thin walls, a pitiful wail of, "We've got nowhere else." I didn't crack it open, just leaned against it. Voice ice. "You didn't care where I went. Figure it out." Frank tried intimidation, leaving voicemails of legal gibberish, but Lena swatted it down with a laugh. "Bluffing," she said, tossing his empty threats aside. "They're cooked." I watched them thrash, their grip on my house slipping through their fingers, every move a desperate claw at a rope already cut. They'd banked on my silence, my softness, but I'd turned it into steel, and now they'd pay. 30 days was a mercy they didn't deserve, a countdown I'd savor, step by step, until I stood in that doorway again, key in hand, their reign a memory I'd burned to ash. They'd pushed me out, forgotten who held the power, and I'd make them feel every second of that mistake. The 30-day fuse burned slow and hot, every tick a pulse of their panic I could feel from miles away. Frank and Mom didn't slink off into the shadows, no, they clawed back with a desperation that was almost pathetic if it wasn't so infuriating. By the first week, they'd scraped together a lawyer, some greasy weasel who sent Lena a stack of papers thick with nonsense, claiming tenant rights and emotional attachment. She called me, her voice a razor edged with amusement, reading their drivel aloud. "They're grasping at straws," she said, shredding their case with a flick of her wrist. "Your deed's a rock, they're throwing pebbles." I smirked, sprawled on my lumpy mattress, the lockbox with Dad's will glinting in the corner. They could squirm all they liked, fling every lie they had, but the truth was a wall they couldn't climb. Frank turned the neighborhood into his stage next, stomping around with a megaphone of self-pity, howling to anyone who'd listen about the heartless kid tearing his family apart. Mom trailed him, eyes red, spinning tales of my cruelty to old friends who'd long stopped caring. Jace caught it all, texting me updates of Frank's bar rants, Mom's doorstep sob-fests, a theater of guilt meant to break me. Some swallowed it, casting sour glances my way, But the ones who mattered, the ones who'd known Dad's sweat in those walls, stood firm. Mrs. Ellis, the widow across the street, cornered me one dusk, her frail hand gripping mine. "They're loud, but they're liars," she rasped. "You're doing right." Her words were a lifeline, a tether to the fight, and I squeezed back, resolve hardening. Their noise couldn't rewrite the ink on that deed. By the second week, they switched to begging, a pitiful pivot that only stoked my fire. Mom's voicemails piled up, her tone crumbling from venom to please. "We'll pay you something," she whined one night, voice thick with tears. "Just don't do this." "Pay me? For my own house?" I deleted it, the absurdity fueling a dark laugh. Frank's kids even tried their luck, showing up at the lumber yard, all crocodile tears and stammered apologies. "We didn't mean it," they mumbled, but I waved them off, my patience a thin, fraying thread. Lena countered their lawyer's last gasp. A brutal filing that slammed their claims shut, her voice smug over the phone. "They're bleeding out," she said. "No moves left." I felt it, their empire of delusions cracking, the house slipping back into my grasp with every flailing lunge they took. The 29th day rolled in, and I was ready to pounce. Lena had the sheriff lined up, a final hammer if they dared to linger. I drove over at twilight, parking down the street, watching his shadows move behind the curtains, boxes stacking sloppily by the curb. Frank's bellows echoed, Mom's silhouette slumped against the wall, the kids hauling trash bags like rats fleeing a flood. That tacky awning sagged, a pathetic crown on their fading rain. I stepped out, leaning on my hood, arms crossed as Frank clocked me. He charged over, face a bloated mask of rage, spit flying as he roared. "You think you've won?" I didn't budge, voice a cold blade. "I have won, Frank. It's mine. Always was. Get the hell out." He froze, deflating as the fight leaked out of him, Mom's quiet sob the only sound left. They'd thrown everything, threats, tears, lies, but it crashed against the rock of my right, my will, Dad's legacy. Tomorrow, I'd walk back in, and they'd be gone, their mark scrubbed clean. The 30th day broke with a sky so clear it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to take back what was mine. I woke in my dingy apartment, the air sharp with purpose, Dad's old jacket slung over my shoulders like armor. The deed sat on the table, its edges worn from my grip, a silent vow fulfilled. Lena had texted at midnight, her words clipped and final. "Sheriff's ready if they stall. It's yours tomorrow." I didn't sleep much, the hum of triumph keeping me restless, picturing Frank and Mom dragging their junk out, their tails tucked. I grabbed my keys, the originals I'd clung to like a lifeline, and headed out. Every step a drumbeat of the reckoning they'd earned. Today, I'd cross that threshold, rip their stench from my walls, and stand where Dad meant me to, unbroken and unbowed. I pulled up just after dawn, the street still, the house looming like a battered warrior waiting for its rightful keeper. The driveway was bare, Frank's truck vanished, the boxes gone, leaving only echoes of their retreat. That hideous awning drooped, a last insult I'd tear down soon enough. I climbed out, boots crunching gravel, and paused, letting the weight of it crash over me. My house, my blood, stolen and sullied, but mine again. I strode up, key slipping into the lock with a satisfying snap, and pushed the door wide. The air hit me, stale and sour with their mess, Frank's cheap aftershave, Mom's overcooked meals, a stench I'd purge. I stepped inside, the hardwood creaking under me, and felt it, a surge of raw, fierce joy. They'd tried to erase me, but I was back, and this was my ground now. The place was a wreck, furniture shoved into corners, walls scratched, trash scattered like they'd bolted in a panic. I roamed through, every room a battlefield they'd lost. My old space, handed to Frank's brats, stank of sweat and spilled soda, posters ripped and curling on the floor. I clenched my fists, then moved on, finding a note in the kitchen, Mom's scrawl shaky on a crumpled scrap. "You didn't need to destroy us," it whined. I snorted, tossing it into the sink, a lie not worth the ink. Destroy them? They'd torched me first, kicked me out of my own life, and now they'd play victim? I started cleaning, scrubbing their filth from every surface, reclaiming it inch by inch, the sting of bleach a sweet balm to the rot they'd left. By noon, Jace rolled up with paint, Dad's deep gray in cans, and we hit the awning first, stripping it down, then coating the door until it shone right again. Mrs. Ellis shuffled over, her eyes bright, leaning on her stick. "It's yours now," she said, voice firm, and I nodded, paint smearing my knuckles like war paint. Night crept in, and I sank onto the steps, the house quiet, breathing with me. The stars burned overhead, and I felt Dad's shadow, steady and proud, a whisper that I'd held the line. They'd underestimated me, thought they could snatch what wasn't theirs, but I'd clawed it back, every nail and board. Frank, Mom, the kids, they were ghosts now, their threats and tears dust I'd swept away. I'd walk these floors alone, rebuild what they'd broken, and let this house stand as proof. They'd forgotten who owned it, and I'd made them feel every second of that mistake. A victory carved in the walls I'd never let go.